Closed Doors, Open Windows. Written by Andrew Adams and narrated by Chadwick Polson. There was a day once when I was whole. Life was good and everything around me fit the standard definition of normal. I went to work like normal, came home to eat dinner and watch TV like normal. Then I went to bed like normal, albeit a little later than I'd have liked. The sun rose and I awoke abnormally early. I clearly remember the air being of a different texture and I felt a slight sense of confusion, although nothing else seemed out of place, so I wrote it off as wear and tear. Fatigue. All seemed well until my arrival at work, where there was no place of business. Allow me to explain. The building where I had arrived daily for years and years to earn a paycheck had vanished. Disintegrated? There was nothing in its place, as if the company had never existed at all besides a dirt lot. I drove home in a panic, fearing mental illness and making phone calls to check if my coworkers had shared a similar experience that morning. Our workplace was gone. There was a minuscule amount of comfort to be sought in knowing I wasn't going through a bout of psychosis, of which there is no known family history, by the way. Although where would I work now? What could have possibly happened to the company? Walking in the house, I immediately hugged my family tightly, knowing the times ahead would be arduous until I could find another job. If only I knew exactly how challenging that would be. The following day, I found out a cousin of mine had gone missing. Life is full of random and unfortunate phenomena, I thought at the time. Although he was never found. Such tragedies happen. Perhaps he left town, hoping for the best. The day after, a neighbor disappeared, and the day after that, another cousin. My attention span was almost entirely spent on finding a new job, so it is possible I didn't pay much mind to these missing folks at the time, but there is immense pressure in having a family to feed without having a job. Eventually, I landed an interview and walked outside to drive away. My car was missing. Not long after, my oldest child then disappeared. So much for the pressures of finding work. The floodgates had opened, and after the incident with my son, I was obsessed with keeping tabs on the daily happenings. Talking to neighbors and friends about their losses, people they knew that were gone, and so on. We tried to make sense of the situation, but how could we? There was no precedent for these events. Thus the term, the further, was born. As in, they have gone off to the further. It was a romantic depiction of what we all feared most, yet couldn't admit or come to terms with, especially knowing my son was there. So for simplicity's sake, we just called it the further. We hoped it was better there, like all the greatest people passed over first in some sort of twisted rapture. But there was no proof of that. Anything to get you through the night is a victory. One day, my wife went over, then my daughter. Fred the neighbor was all I had left in this world. That is, however, until I knocked on his door and was greeted with no answer. He was actually the one who coined the further term. The neighborhood eventually grew to be vacant, except myself, and one by one their houses evaporated too. One morning I walked outside to sit on the porch with my cup of coffee and surveyed nothing but dirt in all directions. Extreme survivor's guilt took over me as questions flooded the old brain. Why me? How? Etc. and ad nauseum as I sipped from my coffee cup until it disappeared from my hand. That was a first at that time, actually witnessing something vanish, although with nobody to tell it to, did it even happen? I still ponder to this day. At the time of recording this recounting of my experience during the apocalypse, I fear the thought of forgetting more than anything. The pictures are long gone. I have no technology to play videos, and all that's left of my family is the collection of memories they left behind. Each night I lay awake for hours, simultaneously hoping I am taken before morning, while also paralyzed by fear of losing yet another memory of my precious children and their mother. I feel as though not possessing any recollection is a direct insult to them. How could I possibly move on without remembering their faces? Although, to be honest, as I force myself to conjure the image of us as a family, the best I can come up with is a blurry version of a photo we had hanging over the fireplace, which is also gone now. I eventually succumbed to sleep, yet woke up right where I left off, thinking of my family. My son's name and face are gone. I know I had a son, and I know without a doubt I still love him. Yet the details have been erased. I would feel nothing but pain if only I remembered how. The house now consists of 4 walls, a ceiling, and a roof. Pleasantries left quite some time ago, although the essentials are nearly gone too. I have a small amount of food hidden away that is still present, but the desire to eat has also devolved into nothing. I wish daily for the desire to breathe to follow, yet to no avail. I have no entertainment, nobody to talk to for the past several months, no reason to repair anything or otherwise make it better. The people who used to live with me here, whoever they were, made my days pleasant. Without them to talk to, I feel very little of anything at all. There is no joy, sadness, wanting, or desire. I am effectively a shell living inside another shell. I only know there was an upstairs because it was there yesterday and gone today. But anything beyond that time may as well have been gone for 100 years. I am utterly alone in this struggle, without even my inner thoughts to turn to for comfort. I am trapped inside the last remaining room of my house, which I believe to have been my bedroom, and walking outside of it greets me only with a cavernous sense of existential dread. Why am I still here? I have faint memories of others aside from myself, beings like me but separate with independent thoughts and actions. They were enjoyable from time to time, if I remember correctly. Hearing words and ideas not created in my own head would be worth all my days left here in return, and then some. Yet here I wander, with no shelter remaining and almost nothing to see aside from flat earth in all directions. Occasionally I stumble across an object, but without the memory in my brain of what it is called or used for, this too is without meaning. I will wake, walk, and sleep multiple times before crossing another of its kind, although the cost of sleeping is to wake up having lost something else. Last night I awoke from a dream. At least I believe it was a dream, and if it was an especially lucid dream that couldn't be shaken easily. I participated in a race to the top of a mountain with a group of faceless people, which I found strange that the memory of other people suddenly reappeared in this instance, but we started at the bottom as would be customary. Right away, the large majority of the crowd rushed forward, clawing at each other to be first in place. Each time one would get even slightly ahead of the pack, the mob would pounce and pull them back, and thus nobody could gain a clear advantage. The higher we got on the mountain, the violence increased exponentially in return. Now, whoever would gain ground would be savagely beaten to death and left wherever they lay. I kept moving at my pace with a small handful of like-minded others, unconcerned with winning but determined to finish all the same. We got to know one another and provided moral support as the climate drastically shifted to that of a bitter cold halfway up the mountain. The fallen littered our pathway until the last one crawled forth from the settling dust, before ultimately succumbing to wounds sustained in battle. Members of my pack began to struggle heavily from exhaustion in the plummeting temperature and increasing altitude. The first one dropped, and I reached out to grab their hand, yet it was too slippery from the snow, and I watched as the body rapidly slid down and disappeared off a ledge. Carefully taking a few steps down to inspect, I realized the path we had taken thus far was disintegrating behind us. and leaving a 90-degree ledge with no room for error. One of the elder members admonished not to look back, and that the only way through is forward. Our group had lost one member, decreasing from 5 to 4. We marched forward, losing another shortly after, then another, both too slippery to hang on to as they slid off the ledge. The two of us trudged forward in tandem, arms interlocked to prevent either from failing. As I marched on, my partner began to grow heavier and heavier until the weight was unbearable and impossible to pull. My determination to finish together had been ironclad, much stronger than my physical being would allow, and we both fell flat in the snow. I turned to discover the passenger I had been diligently dragging uphill was deceased, literally pulling dead weight up the mountain. So I let go and watched the last body bobsled down the slope and off into the abyss. All I had to do at this point was finish, being the last in contention. The top of the mountain was through the clouds and therefore out of sight, while the intrusive thoughts of quitting grew from that of nuance to all-encompassing. I couldn't figure out what purpose I had in continuing, what would be at the finish line, and who would know I never made it. Fortunately, as I put myself through psychological torture and tidal waves of self-doubt, I had subconsciously kept up the pace of walking, finally reaching the summit. Clearly, there could have only been one winner, for the top of this mountain had space for one solitary person, standing room only. Where to now? Going back wasn't an option. The peak stood just a few feet above the clouds, so the path moving down the other side was entirely shrouded in mystery. Then I woke up. As I spoke the story aloud to myself, hoping to make sense of it, the memory of each sentence disappeared behind my recitation. I stood up and walked on, whistling in the wind until my body eventually forgot to breathe.